Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive into the really fascinating world of organizational psychology and high-stakes risk management to basically shatter the illusion of absolute safety. I mean, think about it. If you've ever boarded an airplane, walked into a modern hospital, or frankly even stepped inside a high-rise elevator, you are relying on these massive, invisible, complex systems designed to keep you alive. But how exactly do these high-stakes industries actually manage that ever-present threat of disaster? Well, today, we're going to unpack that exact question.
So, let's start by confronting a pretty provocative assumption right out of the gate. Can any human activity, organization, or system ever be completely, 100% free from risk? You know, it's a view a lot of the traveling public holds. We kind of just assume that when we buy a ticket or seek a service, we're guaranteed an absolute 100% safety rate. But the hard truth, backed up by safety management science, is that no human activity, or human-made system for that matter, can ever be guaranteed to be totally risk-free. Failures and errors are just going to happen, in spite of our absolute best efforts.
Because the reality is that a goal of absolutely zero accidents is completely unachievable, the crucial takeaway here is that true safety actually means aggressively managing those inevitable risks down to an acceptable baseline. Safety isn't just the magical absence of danger, right? It's this continuous, dynamic process of hunting down hazards and managing risk. Ultimately, it's about keeping those inherent baked-in risks at a level we can actually live with.
Okay, let's move into Section 1, the myth of perfect safety.
To really build a foundation for everything these high-stakes industries do to protect us, we have to look at how safety management has fundamentally evolved. Modern safety management has completely shifted away from a traditional, reactive approach to a much more modern, proactive one. Historically, industries would kind of just wait for an undesirable event to happen, like literally waiting for a train to derail, and then reactively write up new rules or minimum standards to stop it from happening again. But today, the focus is all on proactive hazard identification. Instead of reactively scrambling to write rules after a tragedy, modern organizations are out there proactively hunting for hazards way before they strike, using heavily scientifically based risk management methods.
That brings us to Section 2, measuring and managing risk. Now, if safety actually means keeping risk at an acceptable level, we really need to understand the math behind how disaster is measured. You kind of have to look at risk as this multidimensional puzzle. Imagine a massive 100-passenger cable car and your standard little 12-passenger elevator. The exact mathematical probability, the likelihood of the supporting cable snapping on both of those might actually be identical. However, the severity of that cable car failing is vastly higher, just based on the sheer number of lives at stake and the crazy environment it operates in. So whenever an industry evaluates a hazard, they absolutely have to weigh both sides of the coin, the likelihood of it happening and the severity of its potential consequences.
By evaluating both that likelihood and severity, organizations sort risks into three distinct buckets. If a risk is deemed unacceptable, that's a hard stop. Operations have to halt until it's fixed. If it's acceptable, the risk is so incredibly low that standard operations just continue as normal. But that middle ground, the tolerable zone, that is where the real work happens. This is where organizations step in with mitigation procedures and make some really careful trade-offs to push those unacceptable hazards safely down into the tolerable or acceptable zones.
All right, Section 3, creating a safety culture.
You can have all the math, all the charts, and all the regulations in the world, but if the actual people in the system don't embrace them, the whole thing falls apart. Let's pivot to the healthcare industry for a second to see how they engineer the human side of this equation. Notice how that ancient Hippocratic maxim, first do no harm, is actively being re-engineered right now. It's essentially become the ultimate mission statement for a modern corporate safety culture. A true safety culture weaves first do no harm into the very fabric of its identity. It's no longer just a nice, historical saying. It has to be enshrined in formal corporate statements and elevated to a top priority mission that actually governs day-to-day operations.
But there is a massive roadblock here. To build this kind of culture, leaders absolutely have to eliminate punitive blame. I mean, think about it. Who is going to voluntarily confess to making a mistake if it literally means losing their job? If a hospital is operating on a culture of punishment, medical professionals are inevitably going to hide their mistakes out of pure fear. And since the practice of medicine happens in a realm full of uncertainties, mistakes are 100% going to happen. If those mistakes get driven underground by fear, it completely destroys any chance for the organization to analyze its system weaknesses and actually learn from the event.
So instead of just pointing fingers and blaming individuals, successful hospitals use what's known as a collaborative care model. This model purposefully flattens the organizational hierarchy. It equalizes power, meaning a junior nurse feels completely empowered and expected to speak up and question a senior surgeon if they spot a potential error. It's an amazing check and balance system that relies entirely on shared responsibility and open, respectful communication to catch those errors early. It basically turns the entire medical team into one giant, unified safety net.
Let's keep moving. Section 4, Systems versus Human Error. This concept builds into, honestly, one of the greatest paradigm shifts in modern safety management, and it completely changes how we view the people who make mistakes. Instead of expecting humans to be perfect robots, we have to design systems that actively compensate for our totally predictable biological and psychological weaknesses. Human factors theory teaches us a hard truth. People are going to get tired, they will get distracted, and they are definitely going to miscommunicate. Knowing that, we have to design our technology, our machinery, and our entire work environments to be fully compatible with those human limitations. The really profound truth of modern safety is that human error is almost rarely the actual root cause of an accident. Usually, it is just a symptom of a latent condition buried way, way deep upstream. An error at the operating table or in the cockpit might actually be the direct result of a terrible budgeting decision made 6 months ago, or inadequate staffing, or maybe some poorly maintained equipment. The frontline worker is often just the poor person who happens to be left holding the bag when the flawed system finally snaps.
And this is exactly why the old-school method of just firing the person who made the mistake never, ever made the hospital or the airline any safer. If you just fire the employee but leave those latent flaws in the budgeting, the staffing, or the equipment, well, the next person who steps into that role is going to fall into the exact same trap. True organizational learning requires investigating the entire system, not just punishing the human at the end of the line.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the chain of responsibility.
To see how this whole theory of shared responsibility operates on a massive global scale, we just have to look at the aviation industry, easily one of the most incredibly complex safety networks on the planet. To coordinate international safety across completely different borders, the sector relies heavily on something called Safety Management Systems, or SMS. This isn't just some broad, vague safety program. It is a highly organized, systemic approach to continuously monitor data, hunt for hazards, ensure remedial actions are actually implemented, and strictly enforce performance targets.
And because the global air transport industry is just so intensely interdependent, this systemic approach requires an absolutely enormous web of stakeholders. You have the UN's International Civil Aviation Organization setting the global standards, sovereign states enacting the laws, manufacturers building the planes, airlines flying them, and air traffic controllers guiding them. It literally goes all the way down to third-party contractors doing the refueling and the catering. Every single node in this vast network shares accountability. An accident anywhere compromises public confidence everywhere. It's all connected.
Ultimately, however, despite this massive shared web of responsibility, senior management bears a very special burden here. Why? Because they, and they alone, possess the authority to actually allocate the financial and human resources required to sustain risk management. They alone can change those systemic structures, and they alone can actively foster that non-punitive reporting culture we talked about earlier. Without wholehearted, absolute commitment from the top, safety management is essentially completely ineffective.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought about how we view safety, accountability, and this whole myth of perfection in our own daily lives. Think about it. Are the systems you interact with every day, or maybe the ones you manage yourself, designed for the reality of human fallibility, or are they relying on the incredibly dangerous illusion of human perfection? It is a super critical question to ask, because as we've learned today, expecting perfection isn't a safety strategy, it's a guaranteed recipe for disaster. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the mechanics of safety, and remember to always keep questioning the systems around you.